Welcome to another Unmuted. Of course, as you all know, I continue to talk about the actions of the Chinese Communist Party. And what we are seeing in the northwestern region of China, there in Xinjiang, well, the Communist Party is carrying out these crimes against humanity and a genocide against the Uyghur population and other mostly Muslim ethnic groups. And a series of public files recently obtained by the BBC has revealed the details of the CCP's use of internment camps. It has described the routine use of armed officers, the existence of a shoot to kill policy for those that try to escape, who are trying to seek freedom. So my next guest is someone who is very well versed in this issue and can help us in shedding some light on this. He is the CEO and president of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Ambassador Bremberg, we are delighted to have you join us today. Thank you so very much for your time, because we know that you have worked on this issue. You have led our nation, represented our nation as we have worked at the UN, as we have tried to fight this with other international organizations. So we look forward to your insight. So thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Senator.
Yes, and let's talk specifically about Xinjiang. And the government is currently detaining over 1 million Uyghurs. And I think many times that gets lost in the conversation that it is 1 million Uyghurs. And they are detaining them, imprisoning them, using them as slave labor simply because they are trying to practice their religion. So if you would kind of lay out for us what is occurring and why. And, you know, here in Tennessee, we have a lot of religious organizations who are watching this issue very closely.
Yeah, so what we've seen, and this goes back now over 5 years, where there's been stories and increasing evidence of these horrible human rights abuses taking place, as you said, in Northwest China. This is a region of China that the Chinese kind of empire had conquered later on or at different points in its history. The people in Northwest China that are the largest population, they're called Uyghurs. This is a different ethnic group. They're not Han Chinese when you think of like East Asian, China, the Chinese ethnic group. Uyghurs, like Kazakhs and other Central Asian countries there in the middle of the continent, are a different and much closer to those ethnic groups, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and are predominantly Muslim, very different than the rest of China. And for decades, the Chinese Communist Party ruling this region, its official name is the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And it was kind of generally left alone more. The central government didn't try to exert tons of control over it for a variety of reasons. But it basically, under Xi Jinping, in the last decade or more, we've seen an increased kind of crackdown and authoritarianism in the region, which then turned into, we believe around 2016 in particular, a concerted effort to first surveil, massive, unprecedented levels of surveillance, and then mass detention and incarceration of well over 1 million people in this region. A million, I think, is a very conservative estimate. And this new data that was hacked, I can go into more about that, but that's what's been happening. And the major motivation for that, the Chinese government has said that it's not an incarceration, that it's all about re-education, about preventing religious extremists. But that is clearly not the case, as I can go into in terms of the evidence we've now seen that's been made available to talk about. But that's setting the stage. That's what's happening in the region.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about the individual, the Uyghur that is being detained. How is it that the Chinese Communist Party and their officers come in and then individually detain these Uyghurs?
So we've seen this through witness testimony, and we can talk about this new hack of information that we received that actually has the actual spreadsheets that show how this is done. So they have categorized the entire population. So you have the government's list of all the people in the county, and this is done across the entire region, where they've cataloged every adult and will have detailed biometric information, their biometric photos, plus comments about who they talked to or may have met with, their religious practices, to what degree they're viewed as being kind of overly interested in religion. And while they've tracked these individuals, of course, a huge part is, do they have family or any travel outside of China? That has been a huge precursor to immediate detention. So this is what was happening. And we heard this happening, we saw this happening, but until recently, we didn't know the details of how much information they were gathering. And that once they compiled these lists, they then began detaining more than 10% of the entire population. I mean, just putting that in context, that's how you get to well over 1 million people that are just being detained. Many of them move from detention into a prison, but many never have any kind of even fake judicial process and are just currently being detained. And the new evidence that we just released last week kind of shares greater light on how all of that's working.
And so they are taken to some detention facility and then possibly moved to a prison, which we have heard they're absolutely horrific.
Yes.
So is that correct?
Absolutely. They can be detained sometimes just frequently at a local police office to begin processing, then moved from there to a detention facility. These are these massive detention facilities that have kind of been built out of nothing very rapidly, and then either stay there long term. And frequently, many of these people are initially shortly released, detained and released. They want to capture all their information. So they've brought in, almost the vast majority of the entire population for processing of some kind. Most have been released, but then more than up to almost 15% seem to be continually detained and imprisoned now.
Okay, so let me ask you this. We have heard reports that they were using instant message apps on phones to track these Uyghurs. Is that something that you have found?
Oh, absolutely. So
Okay.
China's electronic surveillance system is on multiple levels. Cameras everywhere are tracking everyone. Once they have the kind of biometric data on your face, it's easier to track your movements in the area. And then, of course, on your phone, their software systems and the apps that people use are all open on the back end to the Chinese Communist Party security services. So that's literally written in their law, their own national security law. So they have.
So there is no security on a phone in China.
No, absolutely not.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation has really done some groundbreaking work when it comes to the Xinjiang police files. I want you to talk a little bit about why that is so important, and then expand on it as to why the American people should care about this.
Yes. Well, this has been incredible. As I said, over the last several years, we've learned about this kind of in bits and pieces, mostly through Uyghurs that have fled or escaped, knowing what's happening, talking about their story. Then you've had small leaks of information of official Chinese documents and some speeches that have been leaked that have again showed greater light into what's happening. What we released last week is completely unprecedented. This is the largest hack of a Xinjiang police system that there has ever been, period. So tens of thousands of documents were hacked and retrieved off of their police station's computer systems, and then by an independent hacker, and then given to us at Victims of Communism, the director of our China Studies program, Dr. Adrian Zenz, who is the world expert on what's happening in Xinjiang. He directly received tens of thousands of documents, all these internal files that their own police system are using to manage. Detaining more than 1 million people would take a ton of work. So all the work that's being done to do that is happening in these files. So these files are incredible. The first thousands of photos, photos, sorry.
Ambassador, the thing that interested me so about the work that you have done and what you have in these files are the connections to Xi Jinping himself.
Absolutely.
And I want you to touch on that because, yes, indeed, the persecution of the Uyghurs, the detention, the way they're tracking, they've totally lost their privacy. And then you see from these files the participation of the head of state himself. So as you talk about why we should care about this, touch on that participation as a part of this.
Absolutely. So just briefly, the files contain, thousands of photos, the first photos ever seen from inside the camps, internal security documents that, that the detention facility is using, all the spreadsheets with data on the individuals. But then this category of never before seen speeches by the most senior members of the government and the Chinese Communist Party directing this genocide in Xinjiang. And it is in those speeches that they personally speak on behalf of Xi Jinping or quote Xi Jinping in the instructions that they are giving. That makes it unambiguously clear that this activity is being directed by Xi himself and the central government in Beijing. Now, as you know, we all know that everything happening in China is at the direction of the highest control within the Chinese Communist Party. But as you said, we didn't have as much evidence before. What was shocking, one of these early leaks of what was called the Xinjiang papers, a couple of speeches that the New York Times reported on several years ago, but never published, we received at the end of last year. And what was stunning is while they got the translation right, what was stunning was that the speeches actually showed that Xi Jinping had been directing, the speaker was quoting Xi Jinping, or that he was directing these activities. And when the New York Times reported on this 3 years ago, they left that part out. So even though it's again, further evidence and the Xinjiang police files that we showed last week, just, it's clear in multiple speeches by the very highest levels of government, this is coming from Xi Jinping. And to your point of so why does this matter? This matters, I would say strongly in two major ways. You said earlier at the outset, Americans are deeply religious people. We care about our own religion. We care about religious liberty. And seeing these types of crimes against humanity, a genocide taking place, I think moves all of us. And we know this is wrong, this is evil, and we should do something about it. The other reason why this is incredibly important is that this is dangerous. This is dangerous to the United States and to the world to see and allow such horrible genocides to take place under the most brutal totalitarian regime on the planet today, which is the Chinese Communist Party, and for them to kind of get away with it, for there to be no consequences. And let me just say clearly, there is nothing the United States or any other country can actively do inside China to stop China from doing this, right? That would be extremely difficult, problematic. But there are incredible things that we can all do to say that's wrong, that we will not be a part of it, and that there have to be consequences for China if they choose to continue to act this way.
Well, I am so grateful for your work and for your insights and for the fact that you would take a few minutes with our unmuted audience and share these today. And victimsofcommunism.org. That is where our audience can go and find out more information about what you have going on, the research work, the papers that you all have. And can people have access to these papers by going to your website?
Yes, they can find it through our regular website. All of those files you can find. I mean, it's huge data sources, but yes, all of that's available. to the public.
Ambassador Andrew Bremberg, we are so grateful for your time today, and I thank you. And to our audience, you can always find me on social media at Marsha Blackburn. Thanks for joining us today.